3 weeks after Charlie Kirk's sudden passing, his wife Erika Kirk stood before a packed memorial hall and said words that no one saw coming. "Charlie didn't die the way you think he did," she declared, her voice trembling but determined. "And the truth about his final moments will change everything you believed about my husband." The room fell into stunned silence as hundreds of mourners tried to process what they had just heard. For 3 weeks, Erika had remained completely silent about the circumstances surrounding Charlie's death. No interviews, no statements, no social media posts. The media speculation had been relentless. Heart attack, the whispers suggested. Stress from years of intense political activism. But Erika had said nothing, leaving the public to fill in the blanks with their own theories. The memorial service was supposed to be a celebration of Charlie's life and legacy. Erika wasn't even scheduled to speak. She had declined all requests, saying she wasn't ready. But something had changed in those 3 weeks of silence. Something had been eating away at her, a truth so profound that keeping it hidden felt like a betrayal of everything Charlie stood for. When the final scheduled speaker concluded, Erika rose from her seat without warning. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to expect from the woman who had been conspicuously silent since becoming a widow. "I wasn't going to speak today," she began, gripping the podium. "But you're only hearing half the story. You haven't heard about the Charlie Kirk who faced his final moments with a courage that had nothing to do with politics. Charlie's last words weren't about politics or America, or even about fighting the good fight," Erika continued, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "His last words were about something that will shock you, challenge you, and maybe help you understand what real faith actually looks like when everything else is stripped away." But what Erika revealed next about Charlie's final moments would spark a national conversation that no one saw coming, and her courage to speak this truth would transform how thousands of people would learn to face their own deepest fears. To understand why Erika's words sent shockwaves through that memorial hall, you need to know what really happened on the night Charlie Kirk died. It wasn't sudden, as the family had claimed. It wasn't unexpected. Charlie had been battling something in private for months, something that would have surprised even his closest supporters. And Erika had been the only witness to a transformation that began long before his final breath. The official story was simple. Charlie Kirk, 29, passed away peacefully in his sleep. The family requested privacy. No autopsy details were released. No medical explanations were given. But behind closed doors, the truth was far more complex. Charlie had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition 6 months earlier, a condition that attacked his nervous system progressively. The doctors had given him 12 to 18 months to live. Charlie had insisted on absolute secrecy, even from his parents and closest friends. "He made me promise," Erika would later explain, "that nobody would know until after he was gone. He didn't want pity. He didn't want his message to be overshadowed by his illness, and he certainly didn't want his political enemies to use his condition against him." So for 6 months, Erika watched her husband face his own mortality while continuing to travel, speak, and fight for the causes he believed in. Nobody knew that behind his characteristic energy and passion was a man counting down his final days. But what tormented Erika during those 3 weeks of silence wasn't just the secret she had kept about his illness. It was what happened during Charlie's final conscious hours, a conversation so profound and unexpected that it challenged everything she thought she knew about her husband's faith. Charlie had always been the confident Christian warrior, the man who spoke with absolute certainty about God, heaven, and eternal truth. Yet in his final hours, he had revealed doubts and questions that showed a completely different side of his spiritual journey. As Erika stood at that podium, looking out at hundreds of people who believed they were mourning a man of unwavering faith and political conviction, She knew that staying silent would be the greatest disservice to Charlie's memory. The real Charlie Kirk, the one who had wrestled with profound questions about eternity while facing his own death, deserved to be known. His final words hadn't been about politics or conservative values. They had been about something far more human, far more vulnerable, and far more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. The audience sat in stunned silence, many of them beginning to realize that everything they thought they knew about Charlie's death had been carefully constructed to protect a much deeper, more complex truth. Some shifted uncomfortably, wondering if they were prepared to hear what was coming next. Others leaned forward, sensing that Erika was about to reveal something that would change not just their understanding of Charlie, but perhaps their own approach to faith and mortality. What Charlie whispered to Erika in his final moments would challenge every assumption about fear, faith, and what it truly means to face eternity, and his words would soon become a source of comfort for millions who had never expected wisdom to come from such unexpected vulnerability. 3 days before Charlie died, Erika continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. He called me into our bedroom at 2 a.m. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window, and he said something I never expected to hear from my husband. The memorial hall remained absolutely silent, hanging on every word. He said, "Erika, I've been lying to everyone, including myself. I'm terrified." A collective gasp rippled through the audience as they tried to reconcile this admission with the fearless public figure they had known. Erika paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the crowd. Charlie Kirk, the man who had built a career on bold declarations and unwavering confidence, had admitted to being terrified in his final days. "You have to understand," Erika explained, Charlie had spent years telling audiences that faith meant having no fear of death. He had preached certainty, absolute trust in God's plan, and the confidence that comes from knowing your eternal destination. But sitting there in our bedroom, facing his own mortality, he told me he had been performing a version of faith that didn't match what he was actually experiencing inside. The revelation sent shockwaves through the audience. Many of Charlie's supporters had drawn strength from his apparent fearlessness, his ability to speak about eternal matters with such confidence that it seemed unshakable. Religious leaders in the audience shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the challenge this posed to the certainty they often projected from their own pulpits. Political allies wondered what this admission meant for the movement Charlie had helped build on foundations of unwavering conviction. "But here's what surprised me most," Erika continued, her voice growing stronger. "Charlie wasn't ashamed of his fear. He said, 'I think I've been confusing faith with performance. Real faith might actually begin when you admit you don't have all the answers, when you acknowledge that approaching eternity is terrifying and beautiful and mysterious all at once.'" The audience sat transfixed, many of them recognizing something familiar in this description of spiritual struggle, something they had felt but never heard articulated by someone they respected. Erika described how that conversation had continued through the night, with Charlie sharing doubts and questions he had carried privately for years. He spoke about the pressure of being seen as a spiritual authority when he often felt like he was still learning the most basic lessons about faith. He admitted that some of his most confident public statements about God and eternity had been attempts to convince himself as much as his audience. "He told me," Erika shared, "that he was grateful his illness had given him time to be honest about his questions, because he was discovering that authentic faith was more beautiful than the certainty he had been performing." The impact of Erika's words was immediate and visible. Tears streamed down faces throughout the hall as people recognized their own hidden struggles reflected in Charlie's honesty. Religious leaders found themselves confronting the gap between their public certainty and private questions. Young people who had looked to Charlie as an example of unwavering faith suddenly saw a different kind of courage, the courage to be honest about fear and doubt while still choosing to trust. The memorial service had transformed from a celebration of certainty into an invitation to embrace a more honest, more vulnerable approach to faith. But Charlie's most profound revelation was still to come, words that would challenge everything his audience believed about strength, faith, and what it truly means to face the unknown with courage. On Charlie's final day, Erika said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent hall, he asked me to help him sit up in bed. He looked me in the eyes and said something that will haunt me and heal me for the rest of my life. The audience leaned forward, sensing they were about to hear the revelation that would define this entire moment. He said, "Erika, I'm not ready to meet God because I finally understand how small I am. And that's exactly why I'm not afraid anymore." The paradox of Charlie's final words hung in the air like electricity. How could admitting smallness lead to fearlessness? How could feeling unprepared actually bring peace? Erika could see the confusion and curiosity written across hundreds of faces as people tried to process this unexpected wisdom from a man they thought they knew. I asked him what he meant, Erika continued, and Charlie smiled for the first time in weeks. He said, "I spent years trying to make God small enough to fit my understanding. But lying here, facing eternity, I realize God is so much bigger and more mysterious than anything I ever preached about. And somehow, that vastness doesn't terrify me. It comforts me." Religious leaders throughout the audience found themselves confronting a theology they had never considered. Charlie Kirk, who had built his reputation on certainty about divine matters, was suggesting that embracing mystery might be the key to genuine peace. He told me, Erika shared, that all his fears had been rooted in trying to control or fully comprehend what was inherently beyond human understanding. But when he finally surrendered to the mystery, when he admitted he was approaching something infinitely greater than himself, the fear transformed into wonder. The most shocking revelation was still to come. Then Charlie said something that will challenge every sermon about fearless faith that's ever been preached, Erika announced, her voice now strong and clear. He said, "I want people to know that it's okay to be scared of dying. It's okay to have questions about what comes next. Fear isn't the opposite of faith. Pretending you're not afraid is." He made me promise to tell everyone that his final peace didn't come from having all the answers, but from being honest about not having them. A wave of recognition swept through the audience as Charlie's words gave permission for something many had felt but never been allowed to express. Parents who had struggled to answer their children's questions about death, pastors who had preached certainty while harboring private doubts, believers who had felt shame about their fears. All of them suddenly found themselves in Charlie's final words. He told me, Erika continued, that the faith community had done people a disservice by suggesting that genuine faith eliminates all fear and doubt. He said real faith might actually be choosing to trust in spite of our fears, not because we don't have them. But Charlie's most profound insight came in his final conscious moments. Just before he closed his eyes for the last time, Erika revealed, Charlie whispered, "I understand now why Jesus was afraid in the garden. Being fully human means facing the unknown with both fear and trust. That's not weakness. That's the most honest thing you can do." The biblical reference struck the audience like lightning, reframing a familiar story in a completely new way. Charlie was suggesting that even Christ's fear in Gethsemane wasn't a failure of faith, but a model of authentic humanity approaching the divine mystery. These weren't the words anyone expected from America's most confident young conservative voice, but they would soon become the most shared, most quoted, and most life-changing final message in recent memory, giving millions permission to embrace both their fears and their faith simultaneously. The silence that followed Erika's revelation was unlike anything anyone in that memorial hall had ever experienced. For nearly 30 seconds, not a single person moved, coughed, or even seemed to breathe. Then, something extraordinary happened. An elderly pastor in the third row began to weep openly, his shoulders shaking as decades of performed certainty crumbled in the face of Charlie's honest final words. Within moments, the sound of crying spread throughout the hall like a wave. But these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of recognition, relief, and unexpected freedom. The immediate response was electric. People began reaching for their phones, not to check messages, but to record voice notes to themselves, capturing thoughts and feelings they had never been able to articulate before. A young seminary student in the back whispered to her friend, "He just gave me permission to admit what I've been hiding for years." A prominent evangelical leader, known for his fire and brimstone certainty, sat stunned as Charlie's words challenged everything he had built his ministry upon. The ripple effect was instantaneous and unstoppable. Social media exploded within minutes of people leaving the memorial service. The hashtag Charlie's last words began trending nationwide as attendees shared quotes and reflections from Erika's revelation. But this wasn't typical viral content. There were no arguments or debates. Instead, post after post shared personal stories of people who had been secretly struggling with fears about death, doubts about faith, and the pressure to project certainty they didn't actually feel. Charlie's final message had created a safe space for authentic conversation about the most profound questions of human existence. The response from religious communities was immediate and divided. Progressive Christian leaders praised Charlie's final wisdom as a breakthrough moment for authentic faith. Finally, wrote one prominent pastor, "Someone with Charlie Kirk's platform has acknowledged what most believers feel but are afraid to admit, that fear and faith can coexist, and that honesty about our questions might be more sacred than pretending to have all the answers." However, some conservative voices expressed concern, worried that Charlie's message might undermine the confidence and certainty they believed faith required. Within hours, major news networks were covering the story, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of political analysis or controversial debates, the coverage focused on the thousands of people sharing their own stories of spiritual struggle and finding comfort in Charlie's final words. CNN interviewed a hospice chaplain who said she had already begun sharing Charlie's message with dying patients and their families. "His words are giving people permission to be human in the face of mystery," she explained. "That's exactly what people need when they're facing their own mortality." The most powerful responses came from unexpected places. A suicide prevention hotline reported a significant increase in calls, but not crisis calls. People were calling to talk about hope they had found in Charlie's message about embracing fear while still choosing trust. Cancer support groups across the country began incorporating Charlie's final words into their counseling sessions. Military chaplains shared how soldiers facing deployment found courage in the idea that fear and faith could coexist. Even secular grief counselors noted that Charlie's message resonated with people regardless of their religious beliefs because it validated the universal human experience of facing the unknown with both terror and hope. But the most surprising reaction came from an unexpected source: Charlie's own parents, who had remained silent about their son's illness, were about to make a statement that would add another shocking layer to this already extraordinary story. 2 days after Erika's revelation, Charlie's parents, Robert and Linda Kirk, broke their own silence with a statement that stunned everyone who thought they understood this family story. "We want people to know," Robert Kirk announced in a tearful video message, "that Charlie called us the night before he died. He told us about his conversation with Erika, and he made us promise something that we're now ready to honor." The promise Charlie had extracted from his parents would reveal yet another layer of wisdom that had emerged from his final days. "Charlie asked us to start a foundation," Linda Kirk explained, her voice shaking with emotion, "but not the kind people would expect. He didn't want a political organization or a conservative movement named after him. He wanted something called the Honest Questions Foundation, a place where people could explore their deepest spiritual doubts without judgment, where fear and faith could coexist openly." The announcement shocked Charlie's political allies, who had expected his legacy to continue his conservative activism. Instead, his final wish was to create space for the kind of vulnerable spiritual exploration he had discovered in his last months. The foundation's impact was immediate and overwhelming. Within the first week, their simple website received over 50,000 visitors and hundreds of personal testimonials. A mother from Texas wrote about how her teenage son, who had been walking away from faith because of his questions, found permission to return to church after hearing Charlie's story. "My son said, if Charlie Kirk could have doubts and still have faith, maybe there's room for me too," she shared. A seminary student from Oregon described how Charlie's words had saved her from dropping out of theology school. "I thought my questions meant I wasn't cut out for ministry," she wrote. "Now I realize my questions might be exactly what makes me helpful to others who are struggling." The letters kept pouring in from unexpected places. A prison chaplain in Alabama shared how Charlie's message had transformed his approach to counseling inmates facing execution. "These men were terrified of death and ashamed of their fear," he wrote. Charlie's words gave them permission to be afraid and still find peace. A pediatric nurse in Children's Hospital in Philadelphia described using Charlie's framework with young patients facing terminal diagnoses. "We tell them it's okay to be scared, that being brave doesn't mean not being afraid," she explained. "It means trusting anyway, just like Charlie did." The most unexpected transformation occurred in churches across America. Pastors who had heard Erika's revelation began incorporating Charlie's insights into their sermons, creating what became known as the Honest Faith movement. These weren't liberal churches abandoning conservative theology. Many were deeply traditional congregations that simply began making room for authentic questions alongside firm beliefs. One Baptist pastor in Georgia reported that his congregation had doubled in size after he began preaching what he called Charlie Kirk sermons, messages that acknowledged fear, embraced mystery, and celebrated the courage to trust despite uncertainty. "People are hungry for permission to be human," he explained. "Charlie's story gave me the courage to stop pretending I had all the answers." The ripple effects reached far beyond traditional religious communities. Secular grief counselors began incorporating Charlie's framework into their therapy sessions, finding that his permission to embrace both fear and hope resonated with clients, regardless of their faith background. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a psychologist specializing in death anxiety, noted, "Charlie's message validates what we see in healthy grief processing, that fear and acceptance can coexist." His words are helping people who've never set foot in a church find peace with mortality. Even hospice workers, many of whom had worked with dying patients for decades, found new tools in Charlie's final wisdom. 6 months after that memorial service, the foundation received a letter that perfectly embodied everything Charlie had hoped his final words might accomplish. It came from Maria Rodriguez, a hospice worker in Ohio, who wrote, "I've been working with dying patients for 15 years, and I've watched so many people struggle with terror in their final days because they felt their fear meant their faith had failed them. Since Charlie's story went viral, I've been sharing his message with my patients and their families. Yesterday, a 67-year-old grandfather told me, 'I don't have to pretend I'm not scared anymore. I can be afraid and still trust God.'" He died peacefully that night, holding his wife's hand and saying Charlie's words, "I'm small, and that's why I'm not afraid." Your husband's honesty is literally helping people die with peace instead of shame. The foundation also began receiving support from unexpected quarters. Major medical institutions started inviting Erika to speak at conferences about death and dying. Seminary professors began teaching courses on authentic faith in the face of mystery, using Charlie's final words as a framework for theological education that honored both conviction and questioning. Military chaplains across all branches of service reported that soldiers found courage in the idea that fear and faith could coexist, helping them face dangerous deployments with both realistic caution and spiritual trust. The message was transcending religious, political, and cultural boundaries in ways no one had anticipated. But perhaps the most powerful testament to Charlie's legacy came 1 year later, when Erika made another announcement that would show just how deeply her husband's final wisdom had taken root in their own family and created a movement that was changing lives across the globe. 1 year after that life-changing memorial service, Erika Kirk stood at the same podium where she had first shared Charlie's final words. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her sat dozens of people whose lives had been transformed by her courage to speak the truth about her husband's last days. Cancer patients who had found peace in their fear, pastors who had discovered the freedom of honest preaching, families who had learned to embrace questions alongside their faith, and even Charlie's parents, who had watched their son's legacy grow far beyond anything they could have imagined. "A year ago, I almost didn't speak," Erika began, her voice now filled with quiet strength rather than grief. "I was terrified that sharing Charlie's real final words would somehow diminish his memory or disappoint the people who looked up to him. But I've learned something important this year. The truth doesn't diminish anyone's legacy. It transforms it into something more beautiful and more helpful than any carefully crafted image ever could be." The audience, many of whom had been present for that first shocking revelation, nodded in recognition of their own journey over the past 12 months. Erika shared story after story of transformation that had flowed from Charlie's honest final message. A young pastor who had been on the verge of leaving ministry because he felt like a fraud now led one of the fastest-growing congregations in his state, built on authentic faith exploration. A mother whose daughter had been afraid to pray because she had too many questions now watched that same daughter lead a youth group that encouraged spiritual curiosity. Military families who had been paralyzed by fear about deployments found courage in the framework that fear and faith could coexist, protecting their loved ones while trusting in something greater than themselves. "But the most important thing I want you to understand," Erika continued, "is why Charlie's words resonated so deeply with so many people. It wasn't because he had all the answers. It was because he finally had the courage to admit he didn't. In a world that rewards certainty and punishes vulnerability, Charlie chose honesty over performance. And that choice gave millions of people permission to be human in the face of mystery." The crowd sat in thoughtful silence, many reflecting on their own journey from performed certainty to authentic faith over the past year. Erika's voice grew stronger as she reached her conclusion. Charlie's real legacy isn't the political movements he started or the speeches he gave. His real legacy is the permission he gave all of us to be afraid and faithful at the same time, to have questions and convictions simultaneously, to approach the greatest mysteries of existence with both trembling and trust. She paused, looking out at faces that had been transformed by embracing this paradox. That's what real courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to be honest about it while still choosing hope. As Erika concluded her remarks, she shared one final revelation that brought the story full circle. "Charlie made me promise one more thing before he died," she said softly. "He made me promise that if his words helped even one person die with less fear or live with more authenticity, then his illness and death would have meaning beyond our personal loss. Looking at all of you, Seeing the letters we receive daily, watching how the honest questions foundation has grown, I can tell Charlie with confidence that his promise has been kept 1,000 times over. The audience rose in spontaneous applause, not for Erika or even for Charlie's memory, but for the truth that had set so many of them free from the prison of performed certainty. Charlie Kirk's final words, born from fear, shaped by honesty, and delivered through love, had become more than a dying man's confession. They had become a living invitation for millions to embrace both their humanity and their faith, proving that sometimes the most powerful truth comes not from those who claim to have all the answers, but from those brave enough to share their questions.